Hey everybody, iPenguin Pat here, and I just finished running the Silent Monastery, the first new dungeon that has been released for Diablo Immortal. This came out as part of the Forgotten Nightmares update, starting here at the end of September and going in through October of 2022. And the first impression of this dungeon, the first one in Mount Xavian, is that it is a little bit long. As you go through the dungeon, you will basically come to areas where you have to clear packs of mobs and kind of boss monsters, and it will light up the area, and you sort of just go between these dark rooms and killing monsters to brighten up the room again. This dungeon, like a lot of the other dungeons, has an absolute boatload of trash mobs, most of which you can skip. If you look on the mini-map, you'll see little blinking target markers where you can just rush to that point and kill everything in that area, and generally that will light up the area and allow you to continue to move along. There you can see the animation of lighting up the area and makes it easier to see what's going on around you. This was our absolute first playthrough, so we were kind of taking it a little bit slow and making sure to kill everything and just sort of take it in to start with, and then we did another run that was a little bit faster. The thing about this dungeon is that it is longer. It's probably the longest dungeon we have, and if you look in the codex, it will actually give you 25 battle pass points instead of either 15 or 20, and that's to reflect the additional length of the dungeon. And with that said, I'm not totally sure how I feel about that unless they increase the drop rate in this dungeon as well. This week it's boosted, so it's not really going to give us a good picture of if the drop rate is any different here, but that's something that I'm not sure how many people have been tracking. That is to say, if dungeons that are longer or have give more blueprint points, does that mean they also have a higher set drop rate, or do you just have to run these longer dungeons more times and it just kind of sucks that it takes more time in those dungeons to get the set that you want? Speaking of sets, all of the sets have been rearranged and they drop in different places now than they did previously. They have made one slight improvement, and I do mean slight. Now, instead of having to go to separate dungeons for each of your rings, you get both ring drops in the same dungeon. So for example, the Grace set, the rings both drop in Namari now, whereas before you had to do Destruction's End and Rapids in order to get both of those rings. This is only a slight improvement. You go from a 1 in 6 chance of getting the item you want down to a 1 in 5 chance, so that is some improvement. But unless the drop rate is significantly increased, we're still dealing with a little bit longer to farm anything meaningful and a lot of frustration trying to get the set that you actually want. Back to the Silent Monastery for a minute. You'll notice that there are a lot of areas where you kind of run to a dead end in order to kill a bunch of stuff, and then that kind of opens up and lets you go the other direction. We have not tested to see if you can split these areas up and kind of the way that you would with Tomb of Fahir, but if I recall correctly, a lot of these areas are blocked off and you just can't proceed forward unless you have already beat the area. One interesting and nice touch that they added to this dungeon is a zip line, which certainly has the potential to be a little bit better than it was, but I do like that there is kind of a different mechanic than some of the other things, even if it's not functionally more skillful and it doesn't really require anything super interesting. I would say it would be a lot more fun if you kind of went like flying off of the zip line at the end instead of coming to a complete stop and kind of sitting there like you got stuck in molasses or goo or something. Now, if you'll recall earlier, I did mention that this dungeon is particularly long, and at this point we're about 4 minutes into the dungeon and we're only about halfway done. I think when we did our second run, we finished it in about 7 minutes. Our first run took about 10. I suspect we can still shave a good amount off of that, but certainly this dungeon is way longer than the other ones, and it's noticeably longer. It's not just a little bit longer. In fact, at this point, we still haven't even fought our first proper boss just yet. That's coming up in the next room. Aside from the fact that the dungeon is extra long, I do like the style and the design of the dungeon. It's an attractive dungeon. I didn't find it to be particularly difficult. None of the bosses really seem to have that like kill you instantly sort of death ray type of thing that you get with Pit of Anguish or Cavern of Echoes. Although it's still probably more difficult than a lot of the other dungeons, just because there are a lot of ambushing mob, high damage mobs, but none of them have just that instant beam type of deal. So with this first boss, he summons up a bunch of adds, but as you can see, if you just burn him down really fast, it's not a big deal. From there, you go into this room where there's like a bunch of monks around like this big center globe thing, and you have to kill all of the, I guess they're called acolytes, before you can move on to the next area. One thing about this room is that there's a bunch of weird line of sight issues where there's like statues in the way or that'll block you from being able to run by. So I don't know that there's really a whole lot of risk of dying per se, but it is really annoying when you try to shoot something and it gets caught on a wall. Prior to being able to join and run this dungeon, there is a short quest line with Deckard Cain where you kind of run around Mount Xavian and you learn a little bit more about how Lord Martanos got corrupted. And it's a pretty simple storyline part, but it's not like instant. There's a couple of solo cutscenes and things like that that will prevent you from being able to enter the monastery. So especially if you plan on running that a bunch, you will want to get that knocked out as quickly as possible so people aren't waiting on you. And now we are moving right on into the last boss, the Ancient Nightmare. And this boss is a pretty simple boss. The one thing that you do have to watch out for is he does have kind of like a spike attack. He ends up knocking you back into history or a nightmare or whatever you want to call it, where you've got some other monsters to kill. And this guy you also have to watch out for because he will hook you in and pull you back, and that can do a pretty good amount of damage. This is actually really similar to a fight earlier in the dungeon. Once you've cleared out all the waves of monsters and mobs and lit all the lights and so on, then you will be returned back to fighting the Ancient Nightmare. And this whole fight sequence ends up taking a pretty good amount of extra time. I think the first time we did it, it took about 2.5 minutes or so. Although obviously you can get that cut down, especially once you have all of your sets. We're doing this in H5, and most of us just got here, so we don't have our sets put together and whatnot. And that's really all there is to say about this dungeon as far as the fighting goes. This boss is pretty easy, and I don't really see any reason why players will struggle with this dungeon at all. I don't think it requires a whole lot of fanciness, and we'll definitely come up with ways to shave off time and do better. I'll go ahead and leave the second run that we did after this, but without any commentary if you want to check it out with the timestamps. And that's all I got for now. If you found this video to be helpful, please like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video, which will hopefully be soon, as long as Hurricane Ian doesn't blow over my house. Catch you later, guys.